The city glittered far below, Manhattan's lights stretching like a sea of diamonds beyond the glass walls of the penthouse. Elena Carter stepped hesitantly inside, her breath catching as her heels sank into the soft Persian rug. Everything gleamed: crystal chandeliers, champagne flutes balanced on silver trays, jewels that shimmered at throats and wrists as if the entire night had been dipped in gold. She tugged at the strap of her modest black dress, borrowed from her cousin, and smoothed the fabric nervously. It fit, but in a room like this, where women floated in gowns worth more than her entire college tuition, Elena felt like an imposter. "Relax," Sophia whispered, brushing a strand of glossy hair back from her shoulder. Sophia always seemed to belong here, glowing in silk, the color of pale champagne, her smile practiced, her laugh easy. "It's just another party. Pretend you've done this 1,000 times." Elena tried, but her gaze darted everywhere, taking in the glittering crowd. Senators and celebrities mingled with CEOs, their conversations laced with the kind of confidence born from knowing they ruled the world. Elena clutched her clutch tighter, whispering, "I don't fit in here." Sophia rolled her eyes playfully. "You're here because you're with me. No one cares where your dress is from or how much money you have. Just smile, darling. You'll charm half the room without trying." She leaned close, her perfume sweet and heady. "Besides, I have someone I want you to meet tonight." Elena didn't ask who. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. Her nerves thrummed with every beat of the string quartet playing near the balcony doors. The party swirled around her, laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses filling the air. Elena let her eyes wander, trying to anchor herself. That was when it happened. He stood near the far side of the room, tall and composed, his presence impossible to ignore. Alexander Richardson. Even before Sophia had pointed him out in old family photos, Elena had known who he was. People in Manhattan whispered his name the way others spoke of royalty. His empire stretched across law, finance, and politics, his reputation both feared and revered. At 45, he carried himself with effortless command. Tonight, he wore a charcoal suit that seemed sculpted for his broad shoulders, his dark hair touched with silver at the temples. His jaw was strong, his posture precise. But it was his eyes that rooted Elena to the floor. Gray, sharp, piercing. He was speaking to someone, nodding politely, but the moment his gaze shifted, it locked on hers. The air seemed to thin, the world blurring around her. Elena's pulse skipped, then raced, as if her body recognized something her mind refused to admit. His stare was not casual, not fleeting. It was steady, intent, as though he had been waiting for her, as though the sea of glittering guests had parted just so he could find her. Elena's lips parted, but no sound came. Heat flushed her cheeks. She looked away, but the effort felt like tearing herself from gravity itself. When she dared another glance, he was still watching, his expression unreadable, yet unmistakably aware. Sophia touched her arm, oblivious to the storm building in Elena's chest. "There," she said brightly, gesturing across the room. "That's my father." Elena's breath caught. "Your father?" "Yes." Sophia smiled, unaware of Elena's trembling. "Alexander Richardson. Don't be nervous, he's intimidating at first, but he's really just—" She trailed off, distracted by someone calling her name. "I'll introduce you later." Elena nodded, but her stomach twisted. That gaze still burned in her memory, dangerous, impossible. And yet, a part of her already knew it was the beginning of something she could neither control nor escape. Across the glittering penthouse, Alexander Richardson lifted his glass slightly, as if in silent acknowledgement. Elena's fingers clenched around her clutch. In that single moment, everything in her life shifted, and she sensed, without fully understanding, that nothing would ever be the same again. The orchestra shifted into a livelier melody as more guests spilled across the penthouse floor, laughter rippling like champagne bubbles in the air. Elena clung to the stem of her glass as though it could anchor her, though her hands trembled with every sip. She told herself it was the unfamiliar wine, the dizzying swirl of wealth around her, but deep inside, she knew the truth. It was him, Every time she dared to lift her gaze, she found Alexander Richardson's eyes cutting through the crowd like a blade of light, steady, unrelenting, as if the hundreds of people between them were invisible. Sophia appeared beside her, radiant as always, introducing Elena to a cluster of young men in tailored tuxedos. They were heirs to fortunes, their smiles polished, their words dripping with the entitlement of those who had never known want. Elena laughed when she was supposed to, nodded at their boasts of luxury holidays and fast cars, but her mind drifted elsewhere. She felt it again, that weight, that presence, as though Alexander's attention pinned her in place. When she excused herself to the balcony, the cool night air rushed her like a blessing. Manhattan glittered endlessly below, a galaxy of light stretching across the horizon. She leaned on the marble railing, trying to calm the thundering in her chest. That was when she heard the voice, deep, commanding, velvet wrapped in steel. "You don't enjoy parties like this, do you?" Elena froze before turning. Alexander stood in the doorway, framed by golden light spilling from the chandeliers. Up close, his presence was overwhelming. His height, the sharp lines of his face, the strength in his shoulders. But it was the sadness hidden beneath his eyes that struck her most. "I'm not used to them," she admitted softly, clutching her glass tighter. "Everything feels like a performance." A corner of his mouth curved, but not quite into a smile. "That's because it is. Everyone here is wearing a mask, except you." Her breath caught. The way he said it, low and certain, made her feel both seen and exposed. She tried to look away, but his gaze held her, daring her to meet it. "I only came because of Sophia," she whispered. "She belongs here, I don't." "She belongs here because she was born into it," Alexander replied, stepping closer until the air between them thickened. "But you're different. You look at this world with honesty. You remind me of something I thought I'd forgotten." Elena's heart pounded so loud she was sure he could hear it. She wanted to step back, to escape the dangerous heat building between them, but her body betrayed her, leaning closer instead. The scent of cedar and smoke clung to him, intoxicating, undeniable. The sound of laughter echoed from inside as a group of guests spilled toward the balcony, but for a heartbeat, Elena and Alexander were alone in their own universe. His eyes swept across her face, lingering too long on her lips before meeting hers again. "You should be careful," he murmured, his voice thick with warning and something darker. "Being noticed by me is not always a blessing." Elena swallowed hard, her pulse hammering. "Then why are you looking at me like that?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, reckless and raw. His expression shifted as though she had broken through a wall he kept carefully intact. For a flicker of a moment, pain and hunger warred in his eyes. Then Sophia's voice called out cheerfully from the doorway, breaking the spell. "There you are, Dad. Elena, I've been looking everywhere for you." Elena stepped back, her cheeks burning, but Alexander didn't move. He only turned his gaze to his daughter with effortless composure, as though nothing had happened, though Elena could still feel the storm simmering beneath his calm exterior. When Sophia linked arms with Elena and led her back inside, Elena dared one final glance over her shoulder. Alexander was still standing in the shadows of the balcony, watching her leave with an intensity that made her knees weaken. In that moment, she knew she had crossed into dangerous territory, and there would be no way back. The night stretched on with music and laughter, but Elena could not shake the feeling that her world had tilted on its axis. Every time Sophia introduced her to another guest, she smiled politely and said the right words, but her mind replayed the balcony encounter. Alexander's voice lingered in her memory, low and dangerous, the way he had told her she was different. Those gray eyes had cut straight through her, leaving her raw and unsteady. When the orchestra struck up a slow waltz, the guests began drifting toward the dance floor. Sophia tugged Elena's arm with playful insistence, dragging her into the golden circle of light beneath the chandeliers. Elena stumbled through the first steps, laughing at her own clumsiness, but when she spun around, her laughter froze. Alexander was watching her. He stood at the edge of the crowd, arms folded across his broad chest, his expression unreadable yet searing with intensity. Sophia excused herself halfway through the song to greet friends, leaving Elena awkwardly on the edge of the dancers. Before she could retreat, Alexander stepped forward. The crowd seemed to part for him. He extended his hand toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. "Dance with me," he said, not as a request, but as something inevitable. Her heart hammered in her chest. She knew she should refuse. She knew the sight of her hand in his could spark questions she was not ready to answer, yet her fingers slipped into his as though they belonged there. The moment his hand closed around hers, warmth shot up her arm. He drew her close, one hand firm against the small of her back, guiding her effortlessly into the rhythm of the waltz. The world blurred into shadows and music. Elena's breath caught as she felt his strength, the steady control in each step. His cologne surrounded her, stirring something deep and forbidden inside her. "You make me forget myself," he murmured, his lips close enough to brush her temple. Elena shivered. "This isn't right," she whispered back, her voice trembling. "Nothing about this is right," Alexander admitted, his eyes locked on hers. "But tell me you don't feel it too, and I'll let you go." She could not. The words died on her tongue as her pulse thundered. The intensity between them wrapped tighter with each turn of the dance until Elena felt she could hardly breathe. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the music ended. Applause rippled through the room. Alexander released her hand with the calm grace of a man who knew how to conceal storms, but Elena felt the absence like a wound. Sophia appeared again, radiant and unsuspecting, slipping her arm through her father's. "I see you've met my best friend properly now," she teased, unaware of the fire smoldering between them. Alexander offered his daughter a faint smile, but his eyes flicked back to Elena once more, filled with something fierce and unspoken. Elena excused herself quickly, retreating to the edge of the party. She pressed her palm to her racing heart, the echo of his touch still burning into her skin. She had crossed another invisible line, and the danger was no longer a distant possibility. It was here, alive, and pulling her deeper with every breath. In that glittering room filled with laughter and light, Elena understood the truth with terrifying clarity. She had become part of a dance far more perilous than the waltz they had shared, and Alexander Richardson was not a man who let go once he had chosen to hold on. The party raged on with laughter and music, but Elena felt like she was moving through a dream she could not wake from. Her cheeks still burned from the dance and her skin still tingled where Alexander's hand had rested against her back. She tried to lose herself in small talk with strangers, but every smile felt hollow. She could feel his presence even when she could not see him, like the air itself had shifted to keep her aware of him. As the night deepened, guests drifted toward the balcony to admire the skyline. Elena slipped away, seeking quiet, her heels clicking softly across the marble floor. The penthouse terrace opened before her, glittering city lights stretching to the horizon. She exhaled, shakily, pressing her hands against the cool railing, as if the city might steady her racing heart. The glass doors opened behind her. She knew without turning who it was. His voice confirmed it, low and commanding, a sound that curled around her like velvet and steel. "You shouldn't be out here alone." Elena's pulse stumbled. "I needed air," she replied, not trusting herself to look at him. Alexander stepped closer, his shadow merging with hers against the marble. "So did I," he said, his tone heavy with meanings that pressed against the silence between them. Elena forced herself to turn, and there he was, no longer surrounded by the safety of crowds. The lines of grief carved into his face seemed deeper in the soft glow of the terrace lights, his gray eyes darker, his control thinner. "You are dangerous to me," she whispered before she could stop herself. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze relay. "Bless. No," he said at last. "You are dangerous to me." Her chest tightened. The words cracked through her like thunder. She wanted to step back, to flee, but her body refused to move. He was too close now, the air heavy with his scent, his presence overwhelming. The silence stretched until it trembled with possibility. Then the mansion lights flickered, plunging the party into sudden shadow. Guests inside laughed at the temporary outage, but on the terrace, the darkness felt different, private, charged. Elena gasped softly, her hand gripping the railing. Alexander's fingers brushed against hers in the dark, not by accident. The brief contact seared her skin. She should have pulled away, but instead she stayed, trembling, her hand caught beneath his. "I shouldn't be doing this," he murmured, his voice roughened with restraint. "Then stop," she whispered back, though her voice betrayed her longing. But he did not stop. His hand slid over hers, firm and steady, anchoring her in the night. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "Tell me you don't feel this," he said. Elena's lips parted, but no denial came. The truth hung between them, dangerous and undeniable. The power came back on inside, light spilling through the glass, but neither of them moved. The moment had already changed everything. Sophia's laughter echoed faintly from the other room, a reminder of the line they were crossing. Elena felt tears prick her eyes from the force of guilt and desire colliding inside her. She turned her face slightly, just enough for her lips to brush against his cheek in a whisper of a touch that was both refusal and surrender. Alexander exhaled sharply, pulling back only enough to search her eyes. In them, he found no rejection, only fear tangled with something deeper. For the first time in years, his carefully ordered control faltered. The glass doors slid open suddenly and a group of guests poured onto the terrace. Elena stepped away quickly, her heart pounding, her secret burning beneath her skin. Alexander masked his turmoil with practiced composure, greeting the guests as though nothing had happened. But Elena knew. The line had been crossed, even without a kiss. They were already too far gone, bound to a path neither could escape, and the suspense of what would follow clawed at her with every breath. Elena lay awake that night long after the party had ended, staring at the ceiling of Sophia's guest room while the city hummed outside. Her body felt restless, her skin alive with memory. Every detail of the terrace clung to her, the warmth of Alexander's hand over hers, the steady weight of his gaze, the words he had spoken in the dark. She turned again and again, torn between guilt and desire, until sleep finally claimed her in fractured pieces. The next morning sunlight spilled across the penthouse, catching on glass and gold. Elena rose quietly, hoping to slip out before Sophia stirred, but the sound of footsteps in the hallway froze her. She stepped out and found Alexander instead. He was dressed in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled, his tie absent, his hair still damp from a shower. He looked less like the untouchable titan of the night before and more like a man in his private world. Their eyes met, and the silence between them carried the weight of everything unspoken. "You didn't sleep," he said, his voice softer than she expected. Elena's throat tightened. "Neither did you." A faint smile ghosted across his lips, but his eyes held no amusement. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I told myself to forget last night, to bury it, but I can't." Her pulse thudded painfully. "It was a mistake," she whispered, though the words sounded hollow even to her. "Then why are you trembling?" he asked, his gaze flicking to the way her hands twisted nervously together. Elena swallowed hard. "Because I don't know what's happening to me." Alexander's jaw clenched. He lifted his hand, stopping just short of touching her cheek. His restraint was agonizing to watch. "It's happening to me, too," he confessed, his voice rough. "I thought I buried this part of myself with my wife, but then you walked into that room and I—" He broke off, his control fraying. "You make me feel alive again, and it terrifies me." Before Elena could respond, Sophia's voice echoed down the hall calling her name. The spell shattered. Alexander stepped back instantly, his face hardening into composure. He left without another word, disappearing into his study as Sophia appeared, cheerful and unsuspecting, tugging Elena toward breakfast as though nothing had changed. The hours blurred into polite conversation and endless coffee, but Elena could not stop replaying his confession. She had awakened something in him, and now it lived between them, growing stronger with each stolen glance. That evening, Sophia insisted they all attend another charity event together, this time at a luxury hotel downtown. Elena agreed, though dread coiled in her stomach. She knew being near Alexander again would only tighten the dangerous knot they were already bound in. At the event, the ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and laughter, but Elena barely heard the music. She felt him before she saw him, his presence filling the room, drawing her eyes like a magnet. When their gazes met across the crowd, it was not the cautious acknowledgement of the night before. It was hunger, raw and undeniable. Later, when Sophia was swept away by friends and the crowd pressed close around them, Alexander moved to her side. His hand brushed hers in the shadows, and this time she did not pull away. The contact was small, fleeting, yet it seared through her with a force that stole her breath. "You know this will destroy us," he whispered, leaning so close his words vibrated against her skin. "Then why can't I walk away?" she whispered back. The orchestra swelled, drowning out the world. His hand tightened around hers for just a heartbeat before releasing her, but the message was clear. They had crossed beyond temptation into surrender. For the rest of the night, Elena could think of nothing but that touch, that voice, and the dangerous truth she could no longer deny. She belonged to him now, whether she admitted it aloud or not, and the path they were on promised passion and ruin in equal measure. The weeks that followed blurred into secret rhythms that no one else could see. Elena woke each morning with guilt pressing against her chest, but by nightfall she would find herself answering his calls, her voice trembling as Alexander's deep tone wrapped around her like velvet. They met in places designed to hide them, a quiet restaurant tucked into a forgotten street, the secluded wing of his countryside estate where no one would dare intrude. Every moment stolen carried a pulse of danger, yet each one only bound them tighter together. Elena tried to keep up the appearance of normal life. She still accompanied Sophia to parties and laughed at jokes she barely heard, but her eyes always wandered. Alexander moved through every room like a storm contained in human form. When his hand brushed hers in passing, it felt like fire hidden beneath silk. He would hold her gaze for too long during conversations that meant nothing to others, but everything to her. The secrecy made their love sharper, each stolen kiss burning brighter because it could not last long. In the stillness of his estate, Alexander would strip away the armor of his public life. He would confess how his empire felt empty without warmth, how he had locked himself in a prison of power after his wife's death, how meeting Elena had cracked something open he had thought was gone forever. She listened, her heart breaking and swelling at once, torn between the shame of what they were doing and the fierce belief that she was saving him from a loneliness that might have consumed him. But secrecy came at a price. The more time passed, the harder it became to hide the changes. Sophia noticed how Elena's laughter sometimes faltered, how her eyes seemed restless even in crowded rooms. Once, she teased that Elena was hiding a new romance, and Elena's forced smile nearly gave her away. At the same time, Alexander's rivals began to whisper. A man like him could not afford distraction. His focus had always been his sharpest weapon, but now his board noticed slips, pauses, the way he sometimes left meetings earlier than usual. One evening at a gala, a senior partner remarked too casually that Alexander seemed softer lately, almost human. Elena, standing nearby, caught the sharp edge of suspicion behind the man's smile. The danger pressed in tighter when Alexander gave her a gift. It was a delicate necklace, a silver chain with a pendant shaped like scales of justice, chosen because she had once told him she dreamed of practicing law to defend the powerless. Elena's heart soared at the thoughtfulness, but fear quickly followed. If Sophia or anyone else recognized the gift, questions would come. She wore it tucked beneath her blouse, close to her skin, a secret that shimmered against her like a brand. The affair grew heavier with every meeting, passion braided with dread. Each embrace carried the unspoken knowledge that discovery would shatter everything. Yet neither of them stopped. They couldn't. Still, in the silence after, Elena lay awake against his chest with unease curling in her stomach. She loved him. She knew that now, but the walls were closing in. Secrets left cracks, and cracks always broke open. She thought of Sophia, innocent and trusting, laughing freely beside her. She thought of the boardroom whispers and the watchful eyes, and as dawn crept through the curtains, Elena realized the truth she had been avoiding. Their love was no longer just a secret. It was a ticking clock, and soon, someone would hear it explode. Autumn wrapped the city in gold, but for Elena, every falling leaf felt like a warning. Her life had become a balance of masks, smiling at Sophia by day while her nights burned in Alexander's arms. The secrecy was intoxicating and suffocating at once, each embrace steeped in passion and each departure haunted by guilt. She knew the fragile walls hiding their affair could not last forever, and cracks had already begun to show. It started one evening at a hotel ballroom when Sophia introduced her new boyfriend, a charming young banker with an easy laugh. Elena forced a polite smile, but her chest tightened as Alexander's gaze darkened across the room. He watched every movement, every smile, every brush of the man's hand on Elena's arm. The mask of composure he wore so well threatened to splinter, and when he finally crossed the room to stand at her side, the air between them turned electric. "You seemed very comfortable with him," Alexander said later, his voice low and sharp as they stood in the shadows of a marble corridor. Elena's breath caught at the possessiveness in his tone. "He's Sophia's friend, nothing more." His eyes burned into hers. "No one touches you, not like that." The words struck her with equal parts fear and thrill. She should have protested, reminded him that his claim on her was already dangerous enough, but instead, her pulse betrayed her, racing with a forbidden exhilaration. She whispered, "You don't own me." Alexander stepped closer until his breath brushed her cheek. "Then why do you tremble when I'm near?" Her knees weakened at the truth of it, and she hated herself for the way her body betrayed her. She wanted to resist, to remind him of the line they could never cross further, but instead her lips parted as if inviting him to close the distance. At the last moment, footsteps echoed down the hall and they broke apart. The danger of being caught sent shivers down her spine. That night, Elena lay awake, shaken by what had unfolded. His jealousy was like a storm, powerful and consuming, but within it lay a confession he had not spoken aloud. He could not bear the thought of losing her. The following days only deepened the suspense. Sophia noticed her father's distraction and teased him lightly, not realizing the truth. She teased Elena too, asking why her necklace was always hidden beneath her blouse. Elena laughed it off, her heart hammering, terrified Sophia might look closer and recognize Alexander's gift. Whispers grew in Alexander's business circle as well. A rival at a luncheon remarked slyly about a mysterious young woman rumored to be capturing his attention. Alexander dismissed it with an icy smile, but when his eyes met Elena's across the table, she knew the risk was swelling to a breaking point. Elena began to wonder if passion had blinded her to the danger. She had wanted love, and she had found it, but love wrapped in secrecy was slowly turning into chains. The intensity of Alexander's desire thrilled her, yet his shadow loomed darker with every passing day. One evening he pulled her into his study, closing the door with a finality that sent her heart racing. His hands framed her face, his voice raw. "I can't watch other men near you. I won't. You're mine, Ina." Tears welled in her eyes, torn between the fire of his devotion and the fear of what it might cost. She whispered back, "If Sophia finds out, she'll never forgive either of us, and your world will tear us apart." He silenced her with a kiss, fierce and desperate, as if he could seal their fate with the press of his lips. And in that moment, Elena understood the truth. Their love was no longer just forbidden. It was dangerous. It was consuming them both. And the more they clung to each other, the closer they drew to the inevitable ruin waiting in the shadows. Rain streaked across the glass windows of the penthouse as the city pulsed with restless energy below. Elena sat in Sophia's room trying to concentrate on laughter and gossip, but her mind was unraveling. She could still feel Alexander's kiss from the study, searing through her lips and her soul, a kiss that had bound her to him more than any whispered promise. But with every heartbeat, the walls closed tighter. She was lying to Sophia, her closest friend, while falling deeper into a love that could shatter them both. The first sign of exposure came unexpectedly. Sophia returned early from a shopping trip and found Elena's necklace lying carelessly on the nightstand. Her fingers lifted it curiously, tracing the silver pendant with its scales of justice. "This is beautiful," she said, her voice light but her eyes sharp. Where did you get it? Doesn't look like something you'd buy for yourself. Elena's chest tightened. She forced a laugh, mumbling about a gift from an old family friend, but Sophia tilted her head, clearly unconvinced. Funny, she said, slipping the chain through her fingers. It looks expensive, like something my father might choose. The words cut through Elena like a blade. She smiled too quickly, changed the subject, but the suspicion in Sophia's gaze lingered. That night, Elena tucked the neck, lace deep into her jewelry box, her hands trembling. At the same time, the outside world pressed in with sharper claws. Newspapers whispered about Alexander's distracted behavior. Rivals at the firm spread rumors of a mysterious influence over him. The whispers reached boardrooms and social circles, each one sharpening like glass. Elena saw the strain in his face, the way his jaw tightened when business partners questioned his judgment. One evening, when the pressure became unbearable, Alexander summoned her to his private penthouse suite away from the city. He paced before the fire, his composure cracking. They can sense it, he said, his voice like thunder. They don't know who you are yet, but they know I'm not the same. I've built an empire on discipline and you've made me reckless. Elena's heart broke at the torment in his words, but she couldn't stay silent. If we're destroying everything around us, then maybe… Don't, he cut in, his eyes blazing. Don't say leave, because I won't let you walk away. I've lost too much already. His voice faltered, heavy with grief. After my wife died, I thought nothing could touch me again. But you did. And if I lose you, I will lose myself. Her tears spilled freely. She pressed her hand to his chest, feeling the thunder of his heart beneath. I love you, she whispered, the words terrifying in their finality. But love won't protect us when the truth comes out. Sophia, she will hate me forever. He caught her hand, gripping it as though it anchored him. Then let me carry the blame. Let them hate me. I will endure anything but your absence. They kissed then, fierce and desperate, a vow sealed in fire. But even in his arms, Elena felt the dread rising like a tide. The next night, during a gala held in honor of Alexander's company, the storm grew darker. A rival approached Sophia with a smirk, whispering in her ear, before casting a pointed glance toward Elena. Sophia laughed it off, but when her eyes found Elena across the room, there was a flicker of doubt, a question beginning to form. Elena felt her breath catch, her pulse surging with terror. The walls of secrecy were crumbling, the whispers had grown teeth, and soon the truth would bleed into the open. As the music swelled and crystal glasses clinked, Alexander took her hand beneath the table, his grip fierce and unyielding. He leaned close, his whisper a command. No matter what happens, remember this. I would burn the world before I lose you. And in that moment, Elena understood the truth. The storm was not approaching. It was already here, and it would demand a price neither of them was prepared to pay. The night of Sophia's birthday arrived with glittering chandeliers and velvet-draped tables, but beneath the music and laughter, Elena's nerves were unraveling thread by thread. The ballroom pulsed with light, yet all she felt was shadow. Guests toasted, cameras flashed, and Sophia shone like a jewel at the center of it all, her smile radiant as she greeted friends and admirers. But for Elena, every smile was a mask, every laugh a fragile disguise hiding the storm in her chest. She tried to steady herself, tried to breathe through the guilt that threatened to choke her, but Alexander's presence made it impossible. He moved through the crowd with effortless power, commanding attention, yet his eyes always found hers. That silent claim, that dangerous bond, pulled her into him even when she tried to resist. Sophia's voice rang clear across the hall as she announced her gratitude to her father, raising her glass in honor of the man who had raised her alone, who had never let her feel her mother's absence. Alexander stood tall, proud, but when his gaze swept the room and landed on Elena, his composure cracked. The faintest flicker of longing crossed his face, gone in an instant, but enough to make Elena's stomach twist. Later, when the crowd thinned and music softened into background hum, Elena slipped away into one of the side corridors. Her chest ached from the weight of lies, her skin still trembling from every glance. She pressed her hands to her face, whispering to herself that it had to end, that she had to protect Sophia from the truth. But the sound of footsteps made her freeze. Alexander emerged from the shadows, his expression dark, his jaw clenched with restraint. "You were going to disappear without saying a word," he said, his voice low, raw. Elena shook her head, tears already rising. "I can't do this anymore. Tonight, watching her love you, watching her trust me, Alexander, we're breaking her without her even knowing. And when she does find out, she'll never forgive us." He stepped closer, the power of his presence overwhelming. "I don't care if the world hates me. I don't care if my empire burns. But I can't lose you. Not now." Her tears slipped down her cheeks and she tried to speak, but her voice broke. "If she finds out, she will see me as nothing but a thief, and she'll see you as a man who betrayed his own daughter." The air thickened with the gravity of their secret. Elena turned to walk away, but his hand caught her wrist, holding her fast. "I love you," he said fiercely, the words tearing through the silence. Neither of them noticed Sophia standing at the end of the corridor. She had followed, curious about Elena's absence, but what she heard shattered her. Her glass slipped from her hand, the sound of it breaking echoing through the hall like a gunshot. Elena spun around, her heart dropping into her stomach. Sophia's eyes were wide with horror, her face pale as realization consumed her. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Tell me it's not true." Elena's mouth opened, but no words came. Alexander stepped forward, trying to speak, but Sophia's scream cut him down. "You, both of you, how could you?" Guests began to turn, whispers spreading as Sophia's cry pierced the music. The secret they had fought so hard to bury now blazed in the open, raw and merciless. Elena reached for Sophia, desperate, but Sophia recoiled as if touched by fire. The birthday celebration dissolved into chaos, and Elena stood frozen in the ruins of everything she had once held dear. Their forbidden love had finally erupted into the light, and the cost was written in Sophia's broken eyes. The storm they had feared had arrived, not as a whisper but as a roar, and nothing could stop the destruction it would leave behind. The trial of silence that had followed Sophia's discovery stretched into weeks, and for Elena every passing day felt like she was walking across a crumbling bridge with no way forward and no way back. The city went on glowing, cars rushing down Manhattan streets, but inside her small apartment she lived in shadows. Calls from Sophia went unanswered, not because she didn't want to speak, but because they never came. The girl who once shared every secret with her had now vanished, leaving only a hollow absence and memories that cut like glass. Alexander, too, was distant, trapped in his own storm. The empire he built was beginning to shake under whispers of scandal. His board was restless, investors cautious, enemies circling like sharks sensing blood. Yet none of it mattered to him as much as the fact that his daughter's eyes no longer held trust, but betrayal. He tried to reach Sophia, to explain, but she locked him out, her silence louder than any accusation. Elena, despite the wreckage, couldn't forget the way Alexander had clung to her hands the night everything fell apart, his voice raw as he told her he loved her, that he would not let her go. But love was no longer simple. Every glance at her reflection reminded her of the price of desire, the price of stepping into a love of the world would never forgive. The tension reached its peak the night Sophia called, her voice sharp, brittle, yet quivering with pain. "Meet me. No excuses." Her tone carried the weight of judgment, and Elena knew this meeting could end with the final severing of their bond. She arrived at the Richardson estate with trembling hands, the familiar halls now feeling like the chambers of a court. Sophia stood in the library, arms crossed, her figure framed by shelves of books that had once been Alexander's pride. Her eyes, once warm and playful, now blazed with fury and hurt. "I want the truth," she said. "Not excuses, not stories. I want to hear you say it. Did you love him, or were you just curious?" Elena's throat tightened, but she forced herself to meet her best friend's gaze. "I love him. It's not curiosity. It's not a mistake. It's love that terrifies me and keeps me alive at the same time." Sophia flinched as if struck, her breath coming sharp. And you thought I'd just accept that? That I'd stand by while my best friend shares my father's bed, while you both burn down everything I knew about family? Elena's tears came fast, but she didn't look away. I never wanted to hurt you. I fought it. I tried to stay away, but love doesn't ask permission. It just takes root, even when it shouldn't. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the sound of the fire crackling in the hearth. Then Sophia whispered, her voice cracking, "You destroyed me. Both of you." Alexander entered then, his face carved in anguish. He hadn't been invited into the confrontation, but he couldn't stay away. "Sophia," he began, his voice low but steady. "Hate me if you must. I'll bear it. But don't hate Elena. If you knew how many nights she cried herself sick over this, how many times she tried to end it for your sake." "Stop," Sophia snapped, her hand raised. But her eyes betrayed her. Beneath the fury was a daughter torn apart, not just by betrayal, but by the fear that she was losing her father to another woman, and that woman was the one person she trusted most. The storm was no longer hidden. Father, daughter, and the girl who loved him stood locked in a triangle of pain and longing. And as the night dragged on, one truth became clear. Forgiveness, if it came, would come at a cost none of them had yet imagined. The forbidden love had survived secrecy, but now it stood at the mercy of judgment, with Sophia holding the power to either end it forever or let it reshape all their lives. The storm between them had raged too long. Weeks of silence, accusations, and broken trust had carved wounds too deep to ignore. But tonight, in the same penthouse where it all began, they were forced to face what could no longer be buried. Sophia stood at the window, her arms crossed tightly against her chest, her reflection fractured by the glass. Behind her, Alexander waited with the stiffness of a man preparing for judgment. Elena, trembling but resolute, stood between them, her heart beating so fast she feared it would break free. "No more secrets," Sophia said at last, her voice low, raw, trembling with all the fury she had carried since the night of her birthday. "You want to tell me you love her? Fine. You want to say it was fate? Fine. But tell me why. Tell me why you both thought I deserved betrayal from the two people I trusted most." Alexander stepped forward, his voice firm but broken. "Because I stopped being alive after your mother died. I lived for duty, for you, for the company. But Elena, she reminded me what it felt like to breathe. She gave me back a piece of myself I thought was gone forever. I never wanted to hurt you, Sophia, but I couldn't stop loving her." Sophia's eyes flicked to Elena, shimmering with disbelief. "And you? What excuse do you have?" Elena swallowed hard, her voice unsteady but true. "You were my best friend, my sister in everything but blood. I swear I fought it. I told myself every day it was wrong. But your father, he saw me in ways no one else ever had. He believed in me when I doubted myself. And I fell. Not for his power, not for his wealth, but for his soul. And I will regret hurting you for the rest of my life." The silence that followed was unbearable, the kind that bends the air until it feels like glass about to shatter. Sophia turned back to the window, her hands clenched into fists. For a long time, no one spoke. "Okay." Then she whispered, so softly Elena almost missed it. "You know what hurts the most? It's not that you loved each other. It's that you both loved me too little to trust me with the truth before it destroyed us." Tears slid down Elena's cheeks. Alexander's jaw tightened, his body heavy with guilt. Sophia finally turned, and her face was pale but fierce. "I can't forgive you. Not now. Maybe not ever. But I also can't live hating you both forever. So here's the truth. You love each other? Then bear it. Carry it with the shame, with the whispers, with the knowledge that you burned bridges to be together. Because I won't stand in your way anymore. But I won't stand beside you either." She brushed past them, her heels sharp against marble, and disappeared into the night. The slam of the door echoed like a final verdict. Elena collapsed into tears, but Alexander pulled her into his arms, his own eyes burning. "We've lost her," he said hoarsely. "No," Elena whispered, clinging to him as though the world might rip them apart. "We've lost her trust. But maybe someday she'll come back." They stood there in the hollow silence of the penthouse, the city blazing beneath them, a kingdom that no longer felt like victory but exile. Yet in that exile, they still had each other. Their love was not pure, not untarnished, but it was real, and it was theirs. The forbidden love had destroyed one world, but it had built another, fragile, uncertain, but alive. And as Alexander pressed a trembling kiss to Elena's forehead, both knew the truth. Love, even when born in shadows, demands a price. They had paid it. Now they would carry it, together, into whatever future dared to come. The story had begun with a glance across a crowded room. It ended with two souls scarred but bound, knowing that some choices, once made, can never be undone. The Ritz-Carlton in Manhattan shimmered like a palace that night. Its chandeliers glowed with liquid gold, marble floors whispered the weight of fortunes, and the hush of moneyed voices filled the air like a secret no one dared to break. Elena Ramirez balanced a silver tray against her hip as she walked the corridor on the 5th floor, her uniform pressed, her shoes soft against the thick carpet. She knew the rhythm of this place, the way her footsteps had to be measured, her gaze lowered, her smile polite but distant. It was easier to be invisible here, easier to survive. Suite 512 was her last stop of the night, and she prayed it would be quick. The knock she gave was polite, careful, but the door swung open too fast, too heavy, making her stumble. A wave of whiskey rolled out, sharp and sour, clinging to her throat. The guest stood in the doorway, shirt half open, his eyes glassy with drink. He muttered something that might have been a greeting, or a slur, and waved her inside with an impatient flick of his hand. Elena stepped carefully, setting the tray down on the table. Her plan was to leave in seconds, before his drunkenness turned ugly. But she never made it to the door. His hand closed around her wrist, hot and heavy, and her breath hitched in her chest. She froze, the polished confidence she wore at work cracking into fear. His grip tightened when she tried to pull away. He leaned close, his laugh coarse, words slurring about how pretty she looked, how no one would miss her for a few minutes. The tray rattled as she tried to twist free, her whisper trembling as she told him she had to go, she had work. His fingers dug deeper, cutting off her escape. Panic roared up like fire in her lungs. With one desperate yank, she tore her arm free and stumbled backward, the tray clattering to the floor. He cursed and lunged again, but Elena bolted, slamming out into the hallway, her breath breaking in sharp bursts as she ran. The corridor seemed endless, the patterned carpet swimming beneath her feet. She clutched the hem of her dress as if it could shield her, her eyes darting for any exit, any corner. Behind her, the man staggered into the hall, calling after her. Her shaking hands fumbled with the elevator button, but the numbers above blurred through her tears. She turned blindly, grasping at the nearest door handle. To her shock, it opened. Elena slipped inside, shutting the door with trembling hands. The room was darker, quieter, the air filled with cedar and faint cologne. Relief crashed into her, but only for a second. She turned, ready to beg forgiveness from whatever guest she had disturbed. Her heel caught on the edge of the rug, and the tray she had clutched toppled from her hands, silver and glass scattering with a metallic crash. She gasped, falling forward. The strap of her uniform slid from her shoulder, fabric tugging loose as she landed hard against the sofa. A shape rose from the shadows, tall, sharp, deliberate. Alexander Kane straightened from the armchair where he had been reviewing contracts, his eyes catching the dim light. He was power-carved into human form, broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored shirt, his posture so precise it looked like control itself. He looked at her, trembling on the floor, her strap slipping, her cheeks burning with shame. Elena scrambled to her feet, yanking the fabric back into place, her breath tangled in apologies. Her words came in fragments, half-whispered, begging him not to call security, not to tell her manager. She stammered that she wasn't trespassing, that she had only been running. Her chest heaved with fear, her eyes bright with the shimmer of someone who had spent her life swallowing powerlessness. She pressed herself against the sofa, clutching the hem of her doctor, as if it could protect her from the weight of his gaze. Alexander's face was unreadable, carved from stone. Yet behind his sharp stare, something softened, a flicker breaking through the armor he wore like second skin. He was used to people who performed, who hid behind elegance and charm. But this girl, this maid, stood before him stripped of pretense, trembling, real. Her innocence clung to her more starkly than any perfume or jewel could. The silence swelled, alive, heavy. Elena dared to lift her gaze, and his eyes locked with hers. Heat pricked along her skin, the air thick with something she could not name. Her lips parted to apologize again, but no sound came. She felt her throat close, her body trembling under the weight of his stare. He stepped forward, not threatening, just deliberate. His presence filled the space, and her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She thought he might call the desk, dismiss her, have her dragged out. But his voice came low, certain, steady. Wait. The word cut through the silence, deeper than any command, more final than any dismissal. It held her still, bound her to the floor. And in that single moment, Elena knew nothing about her life would ever be the same again. With Alexander Kane standing alone in his suite long after the trembling maid had fled into the night, his papers lay forgotten on the table. The numbers blurring before his eyes, he had built his empire like a fortress, every brick laid with discipline, every decision made with precision. Yet in a matter of minutes, a girl in a worn uniform had shaken the walls he had sworn would never crack. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid steady in his hand. Though his mind was anything but steady, the memory replayed without mercy. Her wide eyes, her breathless apologies, the way the strap of her dress had slipped and revealed not seduction but innocence. It unsettled him more than any rival boardroom challenge ever. At control was his survival, and yet for the first time in years he felt it slipping. Alexander told himself it would fade. He would bury the memory under contracts and mergers. By morning she would be nothing more than a mistake, a shadow at the edge of his empire. But fate had never obeyed his plans. 3 nights later, Elena was called to the executive lounge, her tray balanced with practiced ease, her hands trembling only slightly as she delivered coffee to the men who decided the futures of entire companies. When she entered the room, her gaze stayed low until the air shifted sharp and heavy. She looked up, and there he was, seated near the window, the skyline behind him glowing like a kingdom of fire. His eyes rose from his phone and locked with hers. She nearly dropped the tray, the heat of recognition surging through her like lightning. He stood, and for a moment she thought he would expose her, call her out for barging into his suite. But instead, he reached for the coffee, his fingers brushing hers, the touch brief but powerful. Her breath caught her heart pounding. She tried to retreat, but his voice stopped her again. Wait! The word anchored her feet to the floor. She turned slowly, her pulse racing. He studied her not with mockery, not with indulgence, but with a searching gaze that made her feel both stripped bare and strangely seen. Are you all right? He asked. Simple words, but they struck with more weight than anything she had heard in years. No guest, no manager, no stranger had ever asked her that before. She nodded too quickly, too desperate to escape, but the sound of his voice followed her down the hall, echoing in her ears. That night, she told herself again to keep her distance. She was a maid barely surviving with rent and her brother's medicine. A billionaire like Alexander belonged to a world so far above hers it was foolish to even imagine otherwise. But her heart betrayed her logic, because every time his eyes found hers, she felt the walls she had built around her life beginning to crack. And Alexander, who had trained himself to resist every temptation to silence every distraction, now found himself searching corridors where he knew she would walk, leaving meetings early just to step into places where her presence lingered. He told himself it was nothing, just curiosity yet. Deep down, he knew the truth. Something had begun the night she stumbled into his world, something that no amount of power could undo. In the silence of his penthouse, as the city lights burned beneath him, Alexander Kane admitted to himself what he had never dared before. The maid had already crossed the line he had sworn to keep sacred. And though he did not know her name yet, he knew he would not let her disappear from his world again. In the small apartment in Queens where Elena Ramirez woke before dawn, her eyes heavy, her body aching from endless shifts, but her resolve as steady as ever, she dressed in her patched uniform, tied her hair back, and kissed her younger brother Mateo on the forehead. Before slipping out into the gray morning, she told herself, as she always did, that she could endure anything as long as he was safe. The hotel swallowed her again. That day, polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers, making her feel smaller than ever. She had learned to move like a shadow, unnoticed, polite, invisible, but invisibility could not erase the memory of Alexander Kane's voice, the word wait echoing through her chest whenever she closed her eyes. She tried to bury it in routine, delivering towels, carrying trays, folding linen. But fate seemed determined to break through her defenses one afternoon. As she cleared glasses from the lounge, she felt it again, the weight of a gaze pressing against her skin. She turned and saw him across the room, his posture sharp as steel, his eyes fixed entirely on her. He said nothing, but the intensity of his stare made her hands tremble. She left quickly, heart hammering but still. He knew in her bones this was no coincidence. That evening, the sky broke open, rain flooding the streets as she left the hotel. Her umbrella snapped in the wind, leaving her soaked, shivering. She pulled her jacket close and hurried toward the subway. A shadow stretched over her, then a dark umbrella steady above her head. She looked up, and there he was, Alexander walking silently beside her, raindrops sliding down his suit as if they dared not touch him. The city blurred around them, but in the cocoon of the umbrella, the world felt narrowed to only 2 breaths. He walked her to the subway without a word. She tried to thank him, but his expression silenced her. Not cold, not indulgent, simply unreadable. Yet beneath it, she felt the tension, the unspoken truth of a man used to control who had begun to lose it in her presence. The following week, she sat in a campus cafe counting coins to see if she could afford even a small cup of coffee. She hesitated, then set the change down on the counter, but before she could speak, a bill slid onto the counter beside hers. A steady hand placed it there. She turned and saw him again, composed, silent, his gaze leaving her, no room to argue. He nodded to the barista, and the cup was hers. She accepted it, warmth spreading through her palms and deeper still into her chest. Their encounters began to stack like stones, forming something she could not deny. He appeared in corridors and lobbies on quiet streets at moments when she least expected it, and always the air between them grew heavier, charged with something unspoken. When his hand brushed hers in passing, when his eyes lingered too long on her face, when silence stretched just one heartbeat longer than necessary, she told herself again and again that he was untouchable and she was invisible, but her heart refused to listen, and Alexander, who had sworn never to blur the lines of control, now found himself deliberately sing them step by step, unable to resist the pull of a girl who had walked into his suite by accident and left him altered forever. On a night when the hotel shimmered with noise and celebration, a charity gala filling the ballroom with glittering gowns and champagne laughter, Elena moved through the service floor with her tray, balanced her steps, careful, her uniform damp with sweat from hours of rushing. No one noticed her except when they needed a glass or a napkin, and she preferred it that way. But as she passed the mirrored doors of the ballroom, her reflection caught her, and so did the weight of a gaze. Alexander stood near the far corner in a black suit. His tie loosened, his posture crisp as if carved from stone. His eyes followed her through the crowd. Though he never spoke her name, she felt it. Her pulse raced, and for a heartbeat she forgot she was invisible. His gaze made her seen in a way that terrified her. Later that night, when the guests had gone and silence returned to the halls, she stayed behind, wiping tables on the service floor, exhaustion pulling at her arms. The door opened and he stepped in, his suit jacket gone, his tie hanging loose. He watched her without a word. She froze, the air between them heavy with tension. "You should not work so late," his voice low, steady. She forced a smile and told him she had no choice. She needed every hour, every dollar. His eyes narrowed, not in judgment, but in a strange, searching way. He stepped closer and her breath caught. She could hear the hum of the lights above and the pounding of her heart. He did not touch her, but his presence filled the space, pressing against her resolve. For once, she did not lower her gaze. She looked straight at him, and the silence between them pulsed with something fragile and fierce. He studied her as if memorizing the lines of her face, as if every second mattered. She whispered good night, gathered her things, and left before the moment could shatter. That night in her apartment, she lay awake, Matteo asleep in the next room, her hands pressed to, her face the memory of his nearness still alive on her skin. She repeated to herself, it could not happen. It must not happen. But deep down, she knew the line was already blurring. Days later, as she passed through the lobby, she found him again, this time by the photographs displayed from past events. Images of fundraisers and donations, years of polished appearances. One frame drew her in a Christmas drive nearly a decade ago. A younger Alexander stood with a group of children, his smile practiced, but his eyes softer in the corner of the photo. A thin girl clutched a small gift bag, her eyes too serious for her age. Elena froze because it was her. She whispered the memory aloud, the toy he had handed her the first time she had seen him, though neither had known it. Then, his eyes widened, the mask of control faltering. He admitted he remembered the day vaguely, one of many obligations, but the truth hit them both. Their lives had crossed long before fate pushed them into this collision. The discovery changed everything. What had seemed like chance now felt like destiny, and from that night their conversations carried a weight neither could deny. The magnetic pull that had been building now hummed stronger, threading the past to the present, binding them closer in a way neither could escape, and in the shadows of the hotel whispers began. The billionaire was no longer untouchable. He was being seen too often in places where a maid happened to be. With a storm rolling across the city, lightning flashing against the glass towers of Manhattan, the Ritz-Carlton swayed with its usual luxury, but in the hushed corridors, whispers had already begun. Maids spoke in careful tones. Staff exchanged glances. The billionaire who never lingered in service floors now seemed to appear wherever Elena walked. His presence was impossible to explain, his silence impossible to ignore. Elena tried to convince herself it was chance fate, nothing more but the truth, pressed closer with each passing day. Her pulse betrayed her logic. Whenever his shadow appeared, when his hand brushed hers by accident, when his voice softened only for her, she fought to bury the growing heat in her chest, but destiny seemed determined to drag her forward. The breaking point came in the form of a guest, a wealthy man known for his temper and his indulgence. Elena was summoned to his sweet tray in hand. Careful, polite, when she entered, she found him waiting, a smirk on his lips, a velvet jewelry case open on the table. He insisted she try on a diamond bracelet. She declined, softly backing away, but he pressed it into her hand, the glittering trap cold against her skin. Before she could return it, the door opened and Alexander Kane stepped inside. He had come for business with the guest, but instead he found Elena cornered, her face pale, the bracelet glinting in her trembling hand. The guest's smirk widened as he claimed she had tried to steal it. Within minutes, security was called. Whispers spread through the corridors too fast to stop. By the time Elena stumbled into the staff room, the rumor had already begun. A maid caught stealing a girl too close to the CEO. By morning, tabloids had the story. Her face splashed across glossy covers. Thief, gold digger scandal. The words burned through her chest like fire. Her job teetered, her reputation shredded by lies she could not disprove. She sat in the manager's office, her breath shallow, her voice lost as accusations flew around her. Alexander faced his own storm behind the closed doors of a boardroom. Sharp suits and sharper eyes cut into him. Investors muttered about risk and reputation. The board warned of billions at stake. They demanded distance from the maid. They insisted he let her fall so the empire could survive. He listened, jaw tight. His hands clenched, the weight of choice pressing down on him on one side, legacy contracts power on the other. A trembling girl who had stumbled into his suite by mistake and somehow stripped away the armor he had worn his entire life. The silence in the boardroom stretched until Alexander stood, his voice calm yet thunderous as he said, she was innocent, framed that he would not abandon her. He told them, if defending truth meant the company could collapse, then perhaps it deserved to collapse. Gasps rippled through the room, but his eyes did not waver. For Elena, the news struck like a blow and a bomb at once. Terror that he had risked everything for her salvation, that someone finally believed her. But also fear, because now the full weight of his dangerous world was turning its gaze upon her, and the storm was only beginning. With silence that did not feel safe, Photographers swarmed outside Elena's small apartment. Reporters shouted her name. Neighbors stared with curiosity and suspicion. The scandal had not faded. It had multiplied, each headline sharper, each rumor heavier. She tried to shield Matteo from it, but even her brother's smile carried shadows of fear. She wanted to disappear. But Alexander Kane refused to let her vanish. He appeared at her door one evening, his expression harder than steel, but his voice quiet. He told her she was not alone, that no lie, no tabloid, no boardroom would break her. She believed him. And yet the fear in her chest deepened because loyalty from a man like him came with enemies she could not even see. One of those enemies was already moving Victor Hale, a rival whose hunger for power stretched back years. He had waited for a weakness in Kane Holdings, and now he saw one. Alexander's heart. Victor understood that the empire of numbers and contracts could be shaken not by mergers, but by love. The first warning came as a slip of paper pushed under Alexander's penthouse door. 4 words, written in sharp ink. Walk away from her. Alexander read it twice, his fist tightening until the note tore. He increased security, placed men at hotel entrances. Cars trailed Elena on her way to school, and every night he drove her home himself. But the danger only grew more visible. Elena noticed the dark suits near the lobby, the cars idling too long on quiet streets. She tried to argue that she could take care of herself, but Alexander's tone silenced her. He was not merely cautious, he was preparing for war. She saw it in his eyes, and it made her heart ache with both fear and something deeper. The storm finally broke one evening when she left work with a bag of groceries for Matteo. The street was dim, the air heavy. A van slowed beside her. Hands grabbed her before she could scream. Apples spilled across the pavement. She fought, clawing, kicking, but a cloth pressed to her face and darkness swallowed her. She awoke hours later in a warehouse, the smell of oil and rust sharp against her tongue. Her wrists bound her head. Throbbing, strangers circled her, their eyes cold. One leaned close, his voice calm as he told her she was leverage. Nothing more. A bargaining chip to make Alexander Kane surrender a contract worth billions. If he refused, she would not walk away alive. Midnight in his penthouse. Alexander answered the call. The distorted voice demanded signatures, demanded surrender in exchange for Elena's life. The empire he had sworn to protect dangled in the balance. But the thought of her bound and terrified burned hotter than any empire ever could. For years he had fought to preserve control, to guard legacy with an iron hand. But as the city hummed around him and her name echoed in his chest, Alexander Kane knew the truth. An empire meant nothing without her, and he would risk everything to bring her home. With the city still asleep, the sky a pale bruise of gray as Alexander Kane prepared for war, he had spent the night in silence, the phone call echoing in his ears, every demand, every threat cutting deeper than any boardroom battle ever had. Elena was out there bound and terrified, while men spoke of contracts and signatures, as if lives were numbers on a page. He gathered his private security men trained for crises the world never saw. Black vehicles lined the curb, silent as shadows. Weapons checked radios, whispering orders. Alexander was not just a CEO, now he was a man stripped of titles. His focus sharpened into something lethal. He told them one thing above all: she comes out alive. In the warehouse, Elena fought to stay awake, fear wrapping around her like chains. Her wrists ached, her throat raw from the cloth they had pressed against her. Her mind raced with flashes of Matteo alone at home. Alexander's face when he told her she was not alone. She clung to those fragments, refusing to let despair consume her. The hours crawled, the men around her grew restless, their voices harsh, arguing about timing, about whether Alexander would comply. One of them sneered that billionaires always chose money over people, but Elena's heart whispered. Otherwise, she had seen the way he looked at her, the way his voice broke rules just by softening her name. Before dawn, the silence outside the warehouse shifted. Boots crunched softly, vehicles cut their engines. Alexander entered through a side door, his presence colder than steel, his eyes scanning with precision, every step deliberate. Shadows moved with him, his team spreading like ghosts through the rusted halls. Chaos erupted when the guards realized the breach. Shouts rang out. Gunfire cracked through the air, sparks flying against metal walls. Elena flinched, pressing herself back against the chair, her pulse racing. But then she saw him moving through the storm. unstoppable, focused, as if nothing existed but her. He reached her, cutting the ropes, his hand steady, even as the world shook around them. Her breath broke on his name, her voice trembling, but alive. He pulled her against him, his body a shield as they fought toward the exit. A bullet grazed his shoulder, blood staining his shirt, but he did not falter, every movement powered by the promise that he would not lose her. They burst into the cold dawn light, sirens screaming, police closing in, men dragged away in cuffs, others fleeing into the shadows. Alexander held her close, his jacket wrapping around her trembling form, her tears mixing with the rain on his collar. He whispered against her hair, "I have you." And for the first time, she believed it. The warehouse fell silent behind them, but the war was not over. Victor Hale had drawn first blood, and Alexander knew more battles would come. Yet, as he looked down at Elena, bruised but alive, he also knew that nothing, no rival, no scandal, no empire would ever matter more than the girl who had made him cross every line he had once sworn to protect. The steady beep of hospital machines. Elena lay on the bed, her wrists bruised, her face pale, but her eyes alive. Alexander sat at her side, his shirt torn, his shoulder bandaged, yet he looked at her as if she were the only thing anchoring him to the world. Nurses whispered about the billionaire who refused to leave the maid's bedside, but he did not care. He held her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, whispering words he had never spoken before. "I cannot lose you." The press outside exploded with headlines. The rescue, the abduction, the blood on Alexander's sleeve. Cameras camped at every hospital entrance. Tabloids called her scandal, called her weakness. The board of directors gathered in secret, warning that his choices had endangered the empire. Investors pulled out contracts, slipped away. Billions vanished overnight. Kane Holdings trembled. But Alexander did not bend. He faced the cameras himself days later. Standing before flashing lights, his voice calm and deliberate, he admitted what no one expected. He said Elena Ramirez was not a mistake, not a scandal, but the woman he would never abandon. He exposed corruption in contracts. He severed ties worth fortunes. He told the world that integrity mattered more than profit and that protecting her was the only choice he could live with. The media erupted. Analysts called him reckless, rivals laughed, but ordinary people saw something different. For once, a billionaire had chosen a human heart over power, and the story spread like fire. Elena watched the broadcast from her hospital bed, her chest tight, her throat aching. Fear that he might regret her had haunted her since the night of her kidnapping. But when she saw him on the screen, shoulders squared, eyes fierce, declaring her name without shame, she wept for the first time, not from pain, but from the weight of being chosen. When she was discharged, Alexander refused to let her return to her crumbling apartment. He brought her and Matteo into a guarded townhouse, its doors secure, its walls safe. Elena resisted at first, terrified of dragging her brother deeper into chaos. But the light on Matteo's face when he saw his own room, his own desk, his own window, broke her resolve. For once her brother could breathe without fear. The nights that followed were not perfect. Alexander tried to cook once and nearly set off alarms. The pasta burned, the sauce ruined. Elena laughed until her stomach ached, tears spilling for the first time in joy rather than grief. Alexander watched her in silence, realizing that the sound of her laughter meant more to him than any empire he had ever built. Outside, the storm still raged. Tabloids hunted her name. Cameras followed her every step. Board members plotted. Rivals circled. But inside those walls, a fragile new life was forming. Elena studying by the lamp, Matteo showing Alexander his homework. Alexander watching them with a tenderness he had once believed impossible. Yet even as warmth bloomed in stolen moments, both knew the world was not finished testing them. Love had bound them, but enemies still circled in shadows, waiting for their chance to strike, and the cost of defying that world was only just beginning to reveal itself. A fragile peace that never truly settled. The townhouse was filled with new rhythms, Matteo's laughter echoing through halls that had once been silent. Elena studying late into the night, Alexander reading beside her, their their mornings starting with quiet cups of coffee instead of boardroom calls. For a moment, it felt like a home, but outside their walls, the world sharpened its knives. The press would not relent. Journalists camped near the gates. Tabloids published every detail of Elena's past, twisting her life into headlines. Neighbors whispered that she had trapped a billionaire. Rivals mocked Alexander in editorials, calling him reckless, naive, unfit to lead the board. Pressed harder than ever, their meetings tense, their voices filled with warning. They claimed investors were abandoning ship contracts, collapsing deals, evaporating, all because he had chosen a maid over his empire. Alexander listened, jaw tight, but unshaken. He told them power without integrity was rot. He told them love was not weakness, but strength. The board stared in stunned silence, unable to recognize the man who had once been their cold, untouchable leader. But while the world attacked from one side, Victor Hale struck from the other. He had lost the battle of the warehouse, but not the war. His men still lingered in the shadows, watching, waiting. He began planting rumors, feeding the press, stories designed to break Elena's spirit. Anonymous voices whispered that she was unfaithful, that she was a pawn playing a game beyond her reach. Photos manipulated stories, twisted her image into something she barely recognized. Elena tried to ignore them, but the weight pressed heavier each day. Walking to class, she felt eyes on her, whispers chasing her down the street in the grocery store. Strangers looked at her as if she were guilty of crimes she had never committed. Matteo came home from school, fists clenched from defending her name, and he realized that hiding was no longer enough. The world would keep tearing at them until she found her own voice. With Alexander's encouragement, she applied for a scholarship tied to legal studies, determined to fight back, not with silence, but with knowledge. When the acceptance letter arrived, she clutched it to her chest, overwhelmed by the thought that she could step into a world where her voice might matter. She was no longer invisible, she was no longer powerless, yet the moment of triumph carried a darker shadow, because on the same night, Victor Hale made his boldest move. He leaked documents suggesting fraud inside Kane Holdings, twisting Alexander's act of integrity into an accusation of corruption. The press devoured it. The board panicked. Investors recoiled for the first time. Alexander's empire teetered on the edge of collapse. Through it all, Elena stood beside him, her hand in his, her eyes steady. She told him he had chosen her against the world, and now she would choose him. She was no longer the trembling maid hiding in corridors. She was the woman willing to face storms at his side. But storms have a way of breaking even the strongest walls, and as the city's lights burned outside their window, the final test of their bond loomed closer than either of them could see. A revelation waiting in the shadows, one that would strike deeper than scandal or business loss and force them to confront a truth that could change everything. On a rooftop above the city where lights shimmered like restless stars, the same rooftop where Alexander once brought Elena coffee in paper cups. Now he stood with her hand in his pulse steady but fierce, a velvet box hidden in his pocket. Storms had passed, but scars remained, their names, still hunted by tabloids, the empire still fragile. Yet in that moment all he could see was her. He spoke not as a CEO, not as a man of wealth, but as someone stripped bare. He told her she had given him more than love. She had given him a reason to live beyond contracts, beyond power, beyond legacy. Elena's eyes filled with tears as he knelt before her, the city rushing like wind around them. She whispered yes, before he could even finish asking the word. Trembling with joy, he slid the simple ring onto her finger, a symbol not of status but of devotion. And when they kissed, the noise of the city faded, leaving only the sound of two hearts that had survived fire. Their wedding weeks later was small. Nothing like the galas Alexander once hosted. Elena walked down the aisle in a borrowed gown, Matteo grinning as he carried the rings. Their vows were not promises of perfection, but promises to keep choosing each other, no matter the storm. When Alexander kissed his bride, applause erupted, but what mattered was the look in her eyes, the reflection of everything they had endured. But the final reveal came not during vows, nor during the dance under strings of golden lights. It came days later when Elena sorted through a box of her late mother's belongings, a faded letter hidden between pages of an old book her mother had once worked briefly for the Kane family years before Elena was born. She had been the quiet housekeeper who comforted a boy named Alexander when his father's words cut too deep. She had been the one who pressed a toy into his hands the day of that long-ago Christmas drive, telling him to give it away to. A child who looked like she needed hope. Elena sat frozen, the letter trembling in her hands, the memory unspooling in her mind, that photograph she had seen of herself as a thin girl holding a wrapped toy. It was no coincidence Alexander had not only been the man she collided with by accident, he had been shaped by the kindness of her mother. Her mother had unknowingly planted the seed of their first meeting years before, when she showed him the letter. His composure cracked for the first time, tears burning in his eyes. He realized the invisible thread that had pulled them together was not chance. It was destiny. Her mother's kindness had reached across time, binding them long before either of them could name it. They stood together in silence, the city glowing beyond their window, both shaken, both awed. Their love no longer felt like defiance against the world. It felt like fate written in hidden lines of their past. They had crossed boundaries, endured scandals, fought enemies, and survived storms. But this truth revealed something greater. They had been meant to find each other all along, and as they held each other close, the world outside, still restless, still sharp. Alexander and Elena understood that their story was not about empires or scandals at all. It was about a boy who had once been comforted by a maid and a girl who had once been given a toy, and how love had turned those fragments of survival into a life that would endure every storm still to come.